Hey everyone, welcome to Saas. I am in my basement and I just finished recording it. We're trying something a little different this week. I've recorded everything ahead of time, but we're all going to watch it together, ideally. So hope it works out and hope you enjoy.
Give thanks to the Lord, our God and King. His love endures forever. For he is good, he is above all things. His love endures forever. Sing praise, sing praise. With a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, his love endures forever. For the life that's been reborn, his love endures forever. Sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong. Forever God is with us, forever and ever, forever. From the rising to the setting sun, his love endures forever. By the grace of God we will carry on. His love endures forever. Sing praise, sing praise, sing praise, sing praise. Forever God is faithful, forever God is strong, forever God is with us, forever, forever, forever God is faithful, forever God is strong, forever God is with us, forever and ever, forever. I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I've heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night as you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. And I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers only you provide, 'cause you know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Yes, you're perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways to us. Love so undeniable, I can deeper still as you call me, deeper still as you call me, deeper still into love, love, love. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am, it's who I am, it's who I am. Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is alive, forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus.
Instead of mailing everyone my vacation photos, I'm saving a ton of time by posting them to my wall.
Ooh, I like that one.
It's so quick. It's just like my car insurance. I save 15% in just 15 minutes.
I saved more than that in half the time.
I'd unfriend you.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
15 minutes for a quote isn't how it works anymore. With Esurance, 7.5 minutes could save you on car insurance. Welcome to the modern world. Esurance, backed by Allstate. Click or call. Click or call.
That is one of my favorite commercials ever. If you aren't on Facebook, you probably don't get it, but who over the age of 30 isn't on Facebook? Basically, the woman was using the jargon of Facebook with posts and pictures and friending, but totally missing the online aspect of it. It's funny, it's clever, and it shows that sometimes we just don't understand how things work. Imagine coming to the realization that something you always thought worked a certain way didn't work that way at all. If it's something silly like Facebook, right, it's no big deal. But what if it's how God works in this world? What if your assumptions about God were totally reversed? What would that do to your faith?
Well, the prophet Habakkuk deals with this very issue. Things were not working as the Israelites were expecting. The Israelites understood that the world was supposed to work according to a formula that Yahweh has established. It's called retribution theology. Basically, if they do what is right, God will bless them. If they do what is wrong, God will punish them. And in this system, the wicked are supposed to suffer while the righteous prosper. In Habakkuk's day, this formula seems to have been reversed. The wicked are prospering, but the righteous are suffering. And so Habakkuk writes to address this issue. And usually we see a prophet speaking on behalf of God to the people. But in Habakkuk, we see a prophet speaking on behalf of the people to God. Habakkuk has a complaint. He wants to know why God is allowing injustice to be done among his people. He wants to know if God even hears his cries or if God cares at all. Listen to Habakkuk's first complaint in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Basically, Habakkuk was asking God, why are you deaf to my prayer? Why don't you do something about the breakdown of law and order, about the wickedness in the land? He was calling out to God, crying out. But God wasn't listening. Since Yahweh had not yet responded to the prophet's prayers, Habakkuk wondered if God even heard his prayers. And because he undoubtedly assumed that if Yahweh had heard his prayers, then Yahweh would have answered. And just what was he crying about? Well, he looks around and he sees violence and injustice, wrongdoing, strife, and destruction. The law is paralyzed, he says. He's referring to the Mosaic law. And this Hebrew word denotes numbness. And we might say dumbfounded. It's that feeling you get when you're completely stunned and you just don't know what to do or to say. And if you personify the law is completely stunned that people are so awful. And so it's been rendered powerless and ineffective. Things are supposed to work one way, but they aren't even close to functioning rightly. Habakkuk is battling much the same problem that Job did, and the writer of Psalm 73 did. How can we explain why good, innocent people suffer while wicked people flourish? So Habakkuk, believing that God is just and good, he asks, why? And furthermore, how much longer will this go on? I think many of us would find Habakkuk a good one to commiserate with, wouldn't we? We look around and we see much of the corruption in our government and in governments all over the world. A select group are getting rich while the people they're supposed to govern suffer. We see the rich getting away with murder while poor get locked up for far less crimes just because they can't afford a good lawyer. We see inequality based on wealth, on race, on anything else that can divide us. And we ask, why? And how much longer? And while we may feel that many of our cries go unanswered, God actually answers Habakkuk. We think that's what we want, right? We want answers. We want an accounting from God. But I fear that if God answered us, we probably would not be satisfied with his answer either. It might be the same one that Habakkuk got. Continuing on in verse 5, God says this, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people, who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves, and they promote their own honor. God's response is jarring and only seems to aggravate the problem. God says he's going to use the savage Babylonians to come and punish Judah by invading and conquering them. And understand, this is not at all what Habakkuk wanted. At the end of the 7th century, in around 605 BC, Babylon is now the world power. Having just defeated Assyria and Egypt, the Babylonians were ruthless. They are raptors, birds of prey who swoop in and kill with ease. Verse 8 describes that even their horses are more menacing than wolves at dusk. They invade and pillage and destroy and control with an iron fist. That's God's solution to Habakkuk's problem of injustice. Not only is God not going to do what Habakkuk wants on Habakkuk's time, he's going to do the opposite. He's going to raise up a very bad people to come and rout Habakkuk's people. Now, it's tough to fully grasp this since our world is so civilized. But imagine this for a second. Imagine if ISIS continued to grow in power. Imagine if they took over the entire Middle East and they had an army in the hundreds of thousands, complete with all the latest weaponry. And while all that is happening, imagine if this country, America, continued to live wickedly. exploiting and abusing people, discarding the law and allowing those in power to run over the poor and the disenfranchised. And as a punishment, what if God sent ISIS over here to America to teach its citizens a lesson? Now, I'm not suggesting that would happen. America is not Judah. We are not God's chosen nation. We haven't specifically been given God's laws or guiding principles. But this example is getting close to what we're talking about here. Many Christians would be utterly amazed, as the text says, if that happened. Because we just can't see God working in that way. And Habakkuk couldn't either. Habakkuk is appalled at Yahweh's answer to his initial complaint. And so he has to push back against God's plan. And in verse 12 he says this, Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Basically, Habakkuk replies, how can you, the all-good, the just God, who cannot bear the sight of evil, how can you use such a vicious instrument of judgment? In other words, how can you use evil to combat evil? How can you use the very worst in the world to judge the sort of bad in the world? It's a valid question, isn't it? If God can't stand the sight of evil, then why would he choose this method? Why would God allow evil to prosper? Yahweh's use of the ungodly is incompatible with his holy nature. And in Habakkuk's view, Yahweh's holiness should have caused him to prevent the oppression of the people of Judah, especially since some of them remained faithful to Yahweh. But instead, in Habakkuk's view, Yahweh remained idle and silent despite Judah's suffering. And furthermore, part of his protest is that the righteous, including himself, are being punished along with the wicked in Yahweh's plan. The Chaldeans were like fishermen who cast their nets to gather in their catch. The righteous are caught in the net along with the wicked, both sharing the same fate. It just doesn't seem fair or right, does it? Think back to grade school if you can, and think about how many of you were the good kid, right? You followed the rules, you didn't cause disruptions, you towed the line. Now, how many of you are the opposite? Talking when you weren't supposed to, trying to pull one over on the teachers. So for those in the former category, the rule keepers, what was the most frustrating thing that could happen? If one person or a small group did something wrong, let's say talking in the hallways, and the whole class got punished for it. I remember numerous times when recess got taken away from the whole class because of a few rule breakers. It was so enraging. It isn't fair. Why should I be punished because someone else did something wrong? And that frustration is exactly what Habakkuk is voicing here. In his view, it just isn't fair for all the Judeans to suffer for the sins of the few. And I'm sure we've all felt that way from time to time. And perhaps we've even voiced that same objection to God. Why do bad things happen to good people? And so Habakkuk, having made what he believes to be a sound argument, he proudly announces that he has his intention to wait for Yahweh's reply, eager to respond to whatever God might say. He says he's going to station himself on the watchtower as a lookout, waiting with bated breath for God's response. And God responds indeed, but not as he did with Job. For Job, God appears in this whirlwind and shows him the full extent of his abilities. But with Habakkuk, he takes a slightly different tact. He says this starting in chapter 2, verse 3, For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of an end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous person will live by faithfulness. God assures Habakkuk that he has not changed in his nature. He has not joined sides with the wicked. Judgment is coming. God will punish all of humanity's arrogant pride. And when the final scores are added up, only those who trust in God and remain true to him will live. But that's not terribly assuring, is it? Just wait. Wait until God makes all things right again. Sometimes that's all we have, is patience. When everything else falls apart, all that's left is faith. The assurance that God is God and he will set things right and will make things new again. And the key to this entire discussion is the end of verse 4. The righteous person, the one who is right with God, will live with the faith that God's character and promises will win out in the end. And regardless of how God does or doesn't work, God requires faithfulness from us. Faithfulness is seen in our obedience and trust that Yahweh will remain faithful to what he has promised. Like Joshua, God asks us to proclaim, As for me, regardless of what comes my way, I will serve the Lord. There are no easy answers to the questions that Habakkuk poses. Trite platitudes don't fix anything. But that's part of the problem, isn't it? We want everything to be fixed. We want everything to be set right, and we want it now. And we tell people they just believe in Jesus, everything will be good. And I'm not sure where we got this sentiment from, but it's not true, is it? Experience tells us that just because you give your life to Jesus doesn't mean that everything is going to be magically fixed. The Bible never promises that. Job wasn't promised it, and Habakkuk wasn't promised it either. In fact, he was told that things are going to get worse before they get better. And he experienced it firsthand. The Babylonians indeed came, and they punished Judah for her sins. The nation was captured, Jerusalem was razed, the temple was destroyed, and the leaders were exiled. Why? Because of the sinfulness of the people. At the beginning, I talked about retribution theology. Do good, and good things will be good, and things will be good. Do bad, and you'll suffer, right? But that's not reality. The reality is that we're all in this together, and we succeed or fail together. Christians and non-Christians, compassionate and cruel, saints and sinners. But the difference is that we have a mandate to live in hope, to continue to live faithfully. Because there is restoration in store for us. There is renewal. There's a time when things will be set right. And the reason we know that, the reason we can fully believe that is because of verse 20 of chapter 2. The Lord is in his holy temple. God is still on the throne. God has not left, has not abandoned us, and can intervene to set things right at any time. And it is in this future that we put our hope in. It is in this future that changes our weeping into mourning, our weeping and mourning into dancing as we trade our sorrow for salvation. It is this perspective that Habakkuk ends with. Chapter 3 is basically a praise song. All of a sudden, Habakkuk goes from complaint to praise in just a few short chapters. And after recounting God's mighty power displayed in his salvific works in the history of Israel, Habakkuk ends with this, chapter 3, starting in verse 17. Though the fig tree does not bud, and though there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be faithful in God. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. Notice that Habakkuk doesn't say that everything's great. He doesn't view life through rose-colored glasses. He admits that things are pretty bad, that the crops have failed, that life seems to be in the toilet, and yet he will rejoice in the Lord. The key to his entire framework is bound up in that small word, yet. Though all our surroundings and our experiences and our circumstances may be discouraging, yet we can make the choice to rejoice in the Lord and be joyful about God because we choose to focus on Him and not what we see around us. Why did Habakkuk begin with a complaint and end with a song of praise? Because he chose to believe in a God who is still in control. The wonderful truth is just what Habakkuk needed to lift him up out of his deep depression. By fixing his eyes on God, he rose above his discouraging circumstances and found a source of lasting joy in the Lord. In moments when he didn't understand God's ways, he needed to trust in God's unchanging character. And so do we. Habakkuk believed that God is a God of justice and mercy and truth. And in the process, he learned to look at his circumstances from the framework of God's character instead of looking at God's character from the context of his own circumstances. And he concludes this, the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enabled me to tread on the heights. So while things may not have worked out perfectly, Habakkuk chose to run unfettered as he lived in faith. And I think the challenge for us is to do the same. Like the prophet, we too must walk by faith and look forward to that glorious time when Jesus will return to earth and set up his kingdom of peace and righteousness. Faith doesn't mean everything will work out just as we want to. It means that we believe God will work it out how he wants to in his time. You know, sometimes life is a wilderness. You could lose your job. You could develop cancer. Your marriage could fall apart. Maybe you failed in some part of your life. Maybe you're struggling to hold things together. In those dry and barren seasons, our trust in God can face heavy attacks. And it's in those times we ask, why? We wonder what God has in store for us. We wonder what purpose a certain difficulty in our life serves. But understand something very important. Even when life is a wilderness, God never fails his people. God promises refreshing and flourishing. And God showed that not even death can keep his desires for us from coming to fruition. On the cross, Jesus conquered death and the root cause of the world's trouble, sin. That is what we put our faith in, even when life doesn't make sense. Habakkuk's name comes from a Hebrew word that means to embrace. It kind of has a double meaning, I think. On the one hand, the embrace indicated that he wrestled with God and with God's ways. But it also shows that he finally came to grips with some serious problems, and he embraced faith in God even when everything in his life seemed to be falling apart. And so may we, like Habakkuk, embrace the God who is on the throne, who has overcome sin and death, and who promises to make all things new again.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Saas. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.